What would you do if your phone buzzed at 1 in the morning, and the message looked completely normal, except for one word that meant your child was in danger? That word arrived on a Tuesday night. And by sunrise, everything my neighbors thought they knew about me was wrong. Before we go further, if stories about quiet strength, family loyalty, and standing up for the people you love mean something to you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to protect the people you love. Now let's get into it. My name is Arthur Hayes. I'm 71 years old. I live alone in a small house at the edge of a fishing town in Michigan, right where the lake meets the tree line. Most people here know me as the old man who fixes boat motors for beer money and walks his dog, a scruffy mutt named Biscuit, along the shoreline every morning at 6. They don't know I spent 22 years in the Army. They don't know I served in a special forces unit that doesn't get talked about at dinner parties. They don't know about the missions I can't discuss, the friends I buried, or the version of myself I left overseas because I didn't think that man belonged in a peaceful town like this one. I wanted to be forgotten. I wanted to be nobody. For a long time, that worked just fine. My wife, Ellen, passed away 8 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Fast and cruel. After she was gone, my daughter Claire became the only reason I still got out of bed some mornings. Claire was 29 when she married a man named Grant Pierce. Charming, successful, ran a small chain of car dealerships 2 towns over. He had a firm handshake and a smile that made you want to trust him immediately. I didn't trust him immediately. Call it instinct. Call it 22 years of reading people who were trying to hide something. But Claire was happy, or she looked happy, and I told myself an old soldier doesn't get to decide who his daughter loves. That was 4 years ago. I've replayed that decision more times than I can count. The cracks showed up slowly, the way water gets into a boat hull. You don't notice it until you're already sinking. At first it was small things. Grant correcting Claire in front of guests. Grant deciding what she wore to parties. Grant telling jokes about her weight that weren't jokes at all. I remember one 4th of July cookout at my place, about 2 years into their marriage. Claire had made a peach cobbler, one of Ellen's old recipes, and it came out a little runny in the middle. Nothing anyone would have noticed if Grant hadn't said something. He tapped his fork against the dish, loud enough for the whole backyard to hear, and said, "Well, at least you're pretty, because baking sure isn't your thing." A few people gave the nervous kind of laugh people give when they don't know what else to do. Claire laughed too, but her shoulders dropped an inch, like she'd braced for a blow before it landed. I noticed. I always notice. That's the kind of thing training teaches you to catch, the tiny physical tell that says more than any words could. After that day, I started paying closer attention at every family gathering. Christmas, he mocked the sweater she'd knitted him. Easter, he snapped at her in front of my neighbors because the deviled eggs weren't ready on time. Every comment sounded small on its own, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away as a joke or a bad mood. But strung together, over months, they formed a pattern I recognized from a very different kind of training, the pattern of someone slowly wearing another person down until they stopped fighting back. Claire used to be loud. She used to argue with me about politics at Thanksgiving just to get a rise out of me. Slowly, over those 4 years, she got quiet. She started agreeing with everything. She started checking her phone nervously whenever it buzzed, like she was bracing for something. I noticed. I always notice. But noticing and knowing are 2 different things, and Claire never said a word. Here's something most people don't understand about training like mine. It doesn't just teach you how to fight. It teaches you how to wait. How to watch. How to read a room without anyone knowing you're reading it. I spent 2 years quietly watching my daughter's marriage the way I once watched a compound from 400 yards out, patient, careful, gathering pieces I hoped I'd never need. I never needed them, until I did. Let me take you back further, because you need to understand where the code word came from. When Claire was 17, she went through a rough patch with a boyfriend who scared her a little. Nothing violent, just controlling, the kind of controlling that seems normal to a teenager until an adult points it out. I sat her down one evening and taught her something simple. If she was ever somewhere she couldn't talk freely, somewhere she needed help but couldn't say it out loud, she could text me one ordinary-looking sentence with a single word buried inside it. The word was lighthouse. Any text with lighthouse in it meant, I am not safe, come now, don't call, don't ask questions, just come. She rolled her eyes at me back then. Said I was being paranoid. Said this wasn't a spy movie. I told her I hoped she'd never need it, and that if she never used it, I'd consider that one of my life's proudest achievements. For 12 years, she never used it. Then came that Tuesday night. I was asleep in my recliner with the television murmuring low and Biscuit snoring on the rug. My phone buzzed on the side table. I almost ignored it. It was Claire's number, and the message read something like, Dad, can you bring my blue sweater over tomorrow, the lighthouse one? I left it at your place. I don't own a sweater with a lighthouse on it. Claire doesn't either. That word sat there on my screen like a flare going off in the dark. I was moving before I fully understood what I was doing. 22 years of training doesn't ask your permission. It just takes over. I pulled on boots, grabbed my truck keys, and called 911 from the driveway, speaking calmly, giving my daughter's address, describing a possible domestic emergency in progress. The dispatcher asked me to wait for officers. I told her I couldn't promise that, and I meant it. The drive to Claire's house took 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. If you've ever driven toward someone you love while afraid for their life, you know that fear doesn't feel like panic. It feels like ice water in your chest. Your hands go steady. Your mind goes sharp. Every year of your life either prepares you for that moment or it doesn't, and I found out that night which one applied to me. Before we go further into what happened at that house, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where instinct told you something was wrong long before you had proof? Type instinct in the comments if you have, because I want to know I'm not the only one who's felt that. And if this story is pulling you in, don't forget to like it. That simple click actually helps more people find stories like this one. Now, back to that night. Claire's house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of street with manicured lawns and porch lights that made everything look safe from the outside. Nothing about it looked safe when I pulled up. Every light in the house was on. I could hear shouting before I even opened my truck door, Grant's voice, loud, slurred, furious. I moved across that lawn the way I used to move across unfamiliar terrain, quiet, low, deliberate. Old joints or not, some things your body remembers on its own. Through the front window I saw Claire pressed against the kitchen island, both arms raised defensively, Grant standing over her with a broken picture frame at his feet and rage all over his face. I didn't wait for backup. I didn't wait for permission. I went through the side door, which Claire had unlocked years ago in case I ever needed to get her spare key, and I walked straight into that kitchen. Grant didn't hear me until I was already 3 steps behind him. He turned, saw me, and for one absurd second he laughed. "What are you gonna do, old man?" I told him to step back from my daughter. He didn't. He took a swing instead, wild, drunk, careless. I've faced far more dangerous men in far more dangerous places. I caught his arm, turned him, and had him face down on his own kitchen tile before he understood what happened. I held him there, not to hurt him, just to hold him, the same way you'd hold a door shut against a storm. He screamed that I'd broken his arm. I hadn't. He screamed that I was crazy. Claire stood frozen against the counter, tears streaming, whispering my name like she couldn't quite believe I was real. 2 minutes later, red and blue lights washed across the living room walls. The responding officers came in fast, weapons ready, shouting for everyone to show their hands. I raised one hand slowly, kept the other steady on Grant's wrist, and said as calmly as I could, "Retired Army. Victim is secure. Suspect is restrained, not injured." One of the younger officers hesitated at the doorway, studying the way I was positioned, the way I wasn't panicking, the way I wasn't hurting the man beneath me even though I clearly could have. He asked if I'd served. I said yes. He asked which branch. I told him, and something in his posture changed instantly, the way it does between people who understand certain things without needing to explain them. They took Grant into custody that night. Claire collapsed into my arms the moment the cuffs were on him, and I held my little girl the way I used to hold her after nightmares, except this nightmare had been real, and it had been living in her house for years. If this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me writing it, take 10 seconds and share it with someone. Not because I'm asking for a favor, but because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that it's not too late to protect the people they love, and your share might be the thing that reaches them. The weeks after that night were harder than the night itself. Violence ends fast. Healing doesn't. Claire moved into my house temporarily. She slept in her childhood bedroom, the one with the faded soccer trophies still on the shelf. Some mornings she came down and made coffee like nothing had happened. Other mornings she didn't come down at all, and I'd sit outside her door just so she'd know I was there without making her talk about it. Then, about a year in, it became physical. First a shove. Then a grabbed wrist that left a mark she covered with makeup. Then worse. She told me she'd stayed quiet because she was embarrassed. Because she thought admitting it meant admitting she'd made a mistake marrying him. Because somewhere along the way, she started believing the version of herself Grant had built for her, someone too sensitive, too dramatic, too much trouble. I told her something I believe with everything in me. Staying silent about pain doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. What takes real strength is finally speaking up, and she'd just done the hardest thing a person can do. She cried for a long time that night. I let her. Some wounds don't need fixing right away. They just need company while they heal. A few nights later, I woke around 3 in the morning to the sound of the back door opening. I found Claire sitting outside on the porch steps in the cold, wrapped in one of Ellen's old cardigans, staring out at the black water. I sat down beside her without saying anything at first, the way I used to sit with young soldiers who needed quiet more than they needed conversation. Eventually she told me she couldn't sleep because every time she closed her eyes, she pictured Grant's face the moment before he'd shove her, and she hated that even now, safe in my house, he still had that kind of power over her mind. I told her something an old commanding officer once told me after a mission that didn't go the way any of us wanted. He said the body comes home long before the mind does, and you have to be patient with the gap between them. I told Claire the same thing applied here. Her body was safe now, sitting on my porch, wrapped in her mother's sweater, but her mind needed time to catch up and believe it. That wasn't weakness. That was just how healing actually worked, slower and messier than anyone wants it to be. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat out there until the sky started turning gray over the lake. A detective named Rene Alvarez was assigned to the case. Thorough, sharp, patient with Claire in a way that mattered more than I can explain. During one of their meetings, Claire brought out something I hadn't known existed, a small recorder app on an old phone she'd kept hidden in a shoebox. She'd been documenting arguments for almost 8 months, terrified but smart enough to build a record in case she ever needed proof. One recording included Grant saying, word for word, that if her father ever got involved, he'd make sure the old man regretted it. Detective Alvarez sat with us at my kitchen table for nearly 2 hours that day, going through the recordings one by one. Some were short, just a few seconds of shouting or the crash of something being thrown. Others were longer, and harder to listen to, Grant's voice rising and falling in that particular rhythm abusers seem to share no matter where they come from, the calm explanation, the sudden anger, the accusation that somehow it was always Claire's fault. Claire sat beside me with her hands folded tightly in her lap while we listened, flinching at certain moments the way you flinch at a sound you've heard too many times before. At one point, Detective Alvarez paused a recording and asked Claire gently why she'd started documenting things in the first place. Claire said she didn't fully know. Some instinct told her to protect herself, even before she consciously admitted things were as bad as they were. She said a part of her must have known, long before she let herself believe it, that one day she might need proof that this had really happened, because Grant was so good at making her doubt her own memory afterward. That's a tactic, the detective told her later. It even has a name. Gaslighting. Hearing that word out loud, hearing that what had been done to her had a name, that it was a recognized pattern with other victims and other survivors, seemed to lift something off Claire's shoulders in that kitchen. Detective Alvarez looked at that recording, looked at me, and said quietly, "Good thing he didn't know who he was threatening." I didn't feel proud hearing that. I felt sick. Sick that it had taken this long. Sick that I'd sensed something wrong for years and let politeness keep me from asking harder questions. That's a weight I still carry, and I probably always will. Here's something I want to say directly to anyone watching this who suspects someone they love might be hurting in silence. Trust that feeling in your gut. Ask the uncomfortable question. Ask it twice if you have to. The awkwardness of asking is nothing compared to the alternative. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with this story. Do me one favor before we continue, drop a comment with one word that describes what you do in my position that night. I read every single one, and it genuinely helps this video reach more people who need it. The trial happened 5 months later. Michigan winter, gray skies, the kind of cold that gets into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. Claire asked me to be there every single day, and I was. Grant showed up to that courtroom looking like a shadow of the man who used to strut around his dealership lot in tailored suits. His lawyer tried the usual playbook, painting him as a stressed businessman, a devoted husband pushed to a breaking point, a man who made one terrible mistake. Then they turned toward me and tried painting me as the real villain, an unstable veteran who used excessive force on an unarmed man in his own home. That strategy fell apart the moment the prosecution played the body camera footage. The courtroom watched in silence as the video showed exactly what happened, me restraining Grant without a single unnecessary movement, no punches, no rage, just calm, controlled containment while Claire cried against the counter with a bruise forming on her arm. No performance. No exaggeration. Just the truth, captured in real time. Before Grant ever took the stand, the prosecution called 2 witnesses I hadn't expected. One was a former employee from Grant's dealership, a young salesman who testified that Grant had shown up to work more than once with liquor on his breath before noon, and that he'd once overheard Grant on the phone with Claire, speaking to her in a tone the young man described as, like she was a dog that had done something wrong. The second witness was a neighbor of Claire and Grant's, an older woman named Pat who said she'd heard shouting through the walls more times than she could count, but had never called anyone because she didn't want to make trouble for a nice young couple. Pat cried on the stand while she said that. She apologized directly to Claire. It was a small moment, but it stuck with me, because it was a reminder that silence doesn't only come from victims. Sometimes it comes from everyone standing around them too. When Grant took the stand, he blamed the alcohol. He blamed stress from the business. He blamed Claire for being too sensitive. Then he made the mistake of looking directly at me and claiming I had turned his wife against him with paranoid stories about danger. That was the moment Claire stood up before her own attorney even finished the question. She said, calmly, clearly, that no one turned her against him. She said he did that all by himself, one cruel comment and one bruise at a time. She described the isolation. She described the fear of checking her own phone. She described a marriage that slowly convinced her she wasn't worth protecting, until the night her father proved otherwise. I watched jurors wipe their eyes. I watched Grant's own mother lower her head in shame. And I felt something in my chest loosen slightly, like a knot I'd been carrying for 2 years finally starting to come undone. Grant was convicted on multiple counts including domestic assault. He received prison time, mandatory substance abuse treatment, and a permanent restraining order keeping him away from Claire. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement before sentencing, I stood, and for the first time in years, I let myself speak plainly about the life I'd tried so hard to leave behind. I told that courtroom I'd spent 2 decades around real danger, the kind most people only see in movies. I told them fear never fully leaves you, no matter how many medals they pin on your chest. Then I said something I believe more than almost anything else in this world. Strength was never about how hard you can hit someone. Strength is about how gently you can hold someone who's scared, and how fiercely you can protect them without losing yourself in the process. I told the court I didn't hate Grant. I hated what he'd done. I hated who he'd chosen to become. But hatred is a weight I refuse to carry into whatever years I have left, because carrying it would mean he still controlled a piece of me, and he'd already taken enough. I also told the court something I hadn't planned to say until the words were already leaving my mouth. I said that for years I'd hidden who I really was from my own neighbors, from Claire's friends, even from Claire herself in some ways, because I thought the world I came from and the world I wanted to live in couldn't exist in the same house. That night in Claire's kitchen taught me otherwise. The same steadiness that once kept me alive overseas was the exact thing my daughter needed sitting across the table from her afterward, patient, calm, willing to listen without flinching at whatever she needed to say. Hiding that part of myself for so long hadn't protected my family. It had only delayed the moment I could actually be fully useful to them. As deputies let him out, he glanced back at Claire one final time. Not smug anymore. Not confident. Just small, and afraid, and finally facing the consequences that had been building for years. Claire didn't say anything to him. She squeezed my hand instead, and we walked out of that courtroom together. We're getting close to the end of this story, but before we finish, I want to ask for one more thing. If this video has moved you even a little, tap that like button right now. It costs nothing, and it tells me you want more stories like this one. Subscribing means you won't miss the next one, and honestly, some of the best stories I've got are still ahead. Spring came slowly that year, the way it always does up here near the lake, ice melting off the shoreline in patches, geese returning before the snow was even fully gone. Claire found a small apartment above a bakery downtown, filled with sunlight and the smell of fresh bread every morning. She started therapy, real therapy, not the kind people do to check a box, but the kind where you show up every week and do the hard work of rebuilding yourself piece by piece. She got her old laugh back slowly. Not all at once. Some days were harder than others. But I watched my daughter come back to life the way spring brings a frozen lake back to life, quietly, steadily, one warm day at a time. One evening that spring, Claire called me just to talk, no crisis, no emergency, just a regular phone call about nothing in particular, the price of gas, a book she was reading, a coworker who kept microwaving fish in the office break room. I hung up that call and sat in my kitchen for a long moment, just letting it settle in. A normal phone call. After everything, that ordinary, unremarkable call felt like one of the greatest gifts I'd ever received. It's strange what you learn to treasure once you've come close to losing it. Claire also started volunteering one evening a week at a local shelter for women rebuilding their lives after abusive relationships. She never asked me to come, but one Tuesday I drove her there and ended up staying to help fix a broken porch railing while she led a support group inside. Watching her walk into that building with her head up, ready to help other people carry what she'd once carried alone, told me more about her recovery than any therapy session ever could have. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming someone who helped other people survive too. I changed too, more than I expected to. For years after Ellen died, I'd buried myself in routine, fixing boats, walking the dog, avoiding anything that required real connection. That night reminded me how easily silence can hide pain, both in the people we love and in ourselves. I started opening up more, spending time with a few other veterans at the VFW hall on Thursday mornings, something I'd avoided for years because I didn't want to relive old stories. Turns out, most of us weren't interested in reliving war. We just wanted a little ordinary company, coffee, complaints about our knees, and the occasional laugh. One warm afternoon in June, Claire brought over a young man she'd started seeing, a schoolteacher named Owen, quiet, patient, the kind of man who asked her opinion before making plans instead of announcing decisions for her. I watched them together on my back porch, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace settle over me. Later that summer, a letter arrived from the state prison. No return address I recognized, just a name I still flinched at seeing. Grant had written to Claire, not asking for forgiveness, not making excuses, just acknowledging what he'd done. He wrote about finally confronting his own drinking, his own need for control, the anger he'd carried since childhood and never dealt with. He didn't ask her to write back. He simply said he hoped she'd found peace, and that he was sorry for taking so long to understand what real strength actually looked like. Claire read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. She told me she didn't know if she'd ever fully forgive him, but she no longer felt controlled by what he'd done. That difference, she said, was everything. One Sunday not long after, our whole small family gathered at my house for dinner, nothing fancy, just grilled chicken, corn on the cob, and lemonade sweating on the porch table. Claire laughed at something Owen said, a real laugh, loud and unguarded, the kind I hadn't heard in years. Biscuit chased a tennis ball across the yard while the sun sank low over the water. Owen leaned over at one point and asked me, half joking, what exactly I used to do in the army, since Claire had mentioned once that I was, kind of a big deal, but never gave details. I looked at him for a second, then at Claire, who just smiled and shrugged like she was leaving the choice up to me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the old urge to deflect the question or change the subject. I told him the truth, plainly, without dramatics, that I'd served in Army Special Forces for over 2 decades, and that most of what I did over there would probably sound like a movie if I described it, which was exactly why I preferred not to. Owen nodded slowly, clearly processing it, and simply said, that explains a lot. We all laughed, and the conversation moved easily onto something else, the way normal family conversations do. It struck me how good that felt, being fully known by the people I loved instead of quietly hiding pieces of myself behind politeness and small talk. Watching that scene, I finally understood something it took me 71 years to learn. For most of my life, I thought strength meant surviving battles far from home. Then I thought it meant staying silent about the pain those battles left behind. But real strength, the kind that actually matters, is answering the phone when someone you love is scared. It's noticing the small cracks before they become disasters. It's showing up, fully, without hesitation, the moment someone needs you most. I think about that word sometimes, lighthouse, and how strange it is that something so small carried so much weight. A lighthouse doesn't chase ships down or drag them back to shore by force. It just stands there, steady, lit, waiting patiently in the dark for someone to look up and find their way home. Maybe that's the real lesson buried in all of this. I didn't save Claire by being the strongest man in that kitchen that night. I saved her by simply being there, steady and lit, the way I'd promised her I would be 12 years earlier when she was just a teenager rolling her eyes at her overly cautious father. Every parent wants to believe they'd know instantly if their child were suffering. The truth is messier than that. Sometimes the people we love the most learn to hide their pain so well that even the people who know them best can miss it for years. All we can really offer is the promise that when they finally do reach out, whenever that day comes, we'll answer without hesitation, without judgment, and without asking them to explain themselves first. That single word, lighthouse, saved my daughter's life. But it was Claire's own courage, the courage to finally speak the truth after years of silence, that truly saved her. If this story reminded you of someone you love, or maybe reminded you of your own quiet strength, share it with them tonight. You never know who might need to hear that it's never too late to reach out, to ask for help, or to become the person someone else needs in their darkest moment. And if you believe, like I do, that love and courage will always outlast fear and control, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more stories like this one still to come.